The Prime Minister has more leeway now because of the unpopularity of our president in your country, frankly.
Are you shocked to hear that polling that suggests that people now almost think that there's more strategic advantage in turning to China than the US?
That is shocking and also crazy because there is no strategic advantage in turning to China in any real way.
The UK's strategic relation to the US is so vital. It's incumbent upon the UK to be standing with the US in conflicts and disputes across the world.
Do you think ultimately no Prime Minister is ever going to have a Love Actually moment? They're always going to pander to whichever US president is in place. Hello and welcome to TrumpWorld with me, Anushka Asthana. I am in London this week. We don't have Matt Fry, although he will be back next week. Now, we are talking about another special relationship, the one between the UK and the US, which is facing its greatest test in years. Andy Burnham had barely unpacked in number 10 before he was on the phone to President Trump. They were discussing football, of course, Manchester, he invited the president over, NATO, and Trump's favourite topic, oil. Now, as the fallout from America's strikes on Iran grows, big questions remain for the new Prime Minister. How far should the UK go in backing Trump? What happens if the White House pushes for something that crosses Britain's legal or political red lines? And can Burnham really build a successful relationship with one of the world's most erratic leaders? Joining me to discuss all of this is Ed Owen, currently director of Think Labour. I say currently because your boss is leading Burnham's transition team right now. And joining us from the US, Evelyn Farkas, who served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Obama and is now the Executive Director of the McCain Institute. Thank you both for being here. You've all had very, very interesting roles over the years that have taught you a lot about the special relationship. I mean, Ed, the first time I came across you, you were working for Jack Straw. He was Foreign Secretary among the years that you worked for him at a moment that, you know, we went to war with America in Iraq. I want to come to some of that decision making. But before I do, when you walk into government, everyone says they sit you down and they tell you something which makes you change your mind on being antagonistic with the US. What do they tell you?
Well, you're given a brief. Any new Prime Minister is given a full briefing, security briefing, which includes information which reflects the fact that our security, our strategic security relationship with the United States is crucial to Britain's well-being, its prosperity, the defence of the country. So it's, as you say,
I need more detail than that, Ed.
Well,
what do they say?
Well, I only worked in the Foreign Office, so in a sense, but I wasn't part of the number 10 briefing. But they obviously are given very detailed information about the nuclear codes, around all sorts of issues around security. And as you say, every British Prime Minister has recognised the vital, or certainly in the recent decades, has recognised the vital strategic importance of that relationship. It's a fundamental aspect of our security. And no Prime Minister, any Prime Minister who's walking through that door feels that responsibility, those core responsibilities of leading the United Kingdom, that's a weighty responsibility, and those issues of security and defence are absolutely fundamental. So it's no surprise in a way, and that will happen with Andy as well. Andy has already signalled and had signalled before he arrived in number 10 how critical he recognised the relationship with the United States to be. That will only be reinforced by what he's heard inside.
I mean, you say he recognised how critical it was. Actually, the first speech he gave on his path to becoming Prime Minister was when he became an MP for Makerfield. And I thought it was pretty punchy. He actually said he wanted to turn away from the divisive politics of the US. I notice he is now on message. He's now talking about how critical the relationship is. He was on the phone within an hour. I mean, the people who were helped organise that were very, very pleased with themselves. Clearly, he is now, saying the right things. I mean, do you think ultimately, given what you've known of those briefings, no Prime Minister is ever going to have a Love Actually moment? They're always going to pander to whichever US president is in place.
Well, There are two issues here, but you're right to say that there's a particular responsibility on a prime minister, which is different to a opposition, if you like, or a Labour Party politician that isn't in power. There are, of course, distinctions in that. Donald Trump is extraordinarily unpopular, both in Britain and across Europe. So, of course, and people are very concerned about the impact of Trump America in terms of how it's fracturing that relationship with Europe. We did some polling, actually, as Think Labour did some polling, which extraordinarily polling, which showed that actually the British public actually find the US under Donald Trump more of a threat than China. Now, that's a very, very amazing. It is amazing. It's an extraordinary situation. And I think it's something that the American public and those in America and the system in America will be very concerned about and should be very concerned about. And so for politicians in the UK who are reflecting a lot of those public concerns, of course, it's very tempting, if you like, for politicians to pander to that. But Andy has been very sensible, I think, in government in being clear that there's a critical importance to that relationship. And remember, the strategic relationship outlasts Donald Trump and is certainly greater than Donald Trump. Of course, it's politically difficult. It was politically difficult for Keir Starmer to deal with Donald Trump. It's going to be politically difficult for Andy Burnham. But and it doesn't mean that if you recognise the importance of that strategic relationship, it doesn't mean that you buy into a lot of the politics of Trump and MAGA in the US, and it's attempts, very deliberate attempts to sow division in Europe and in the UK, and we've got to be very firm about that, but be very clear about the importance of that strategic relationship.
I mean, Evelyn, this is so fascinating, the way that different world leaders are trying to deal with Donald Trump right now. I mean, we've seen Keir Starmer bend over backwards to try to please Donald Trump, only to be told, you're no Winston Churchill. Meanwhile, we've seen the Spanish, Italian and German leaders take a slightly spikier approach. I mean, sitting in Washington, D.C., how do you think world leaders should play it? And how critical are your allies to the US? And in particular, how critical is the UK scene on defence matters?
Yeah, well, Anushka, you also didn't mention Mark Rutte, who takes a completely different approach, which is, very flattering, very almost fawning, right?
To a new level, some would say.
President Trump. Look, all of these approaches can be effective. I think I would agree with Ed that, the prime minister has more leeway now because of the unpopularity of our president in your country, frankly. And so he can take maybe a firmer stance if he wants to, but I don't necessarily think that's required. I think that he can be constructive, and the interests are deep. I will emphasize and agree with Ed. We have a Five Eyes, so those are the intelligence community partners that we have with the UK first and foremost among them, fellowship. And these are intelligence professionals who work together, 12 of them every year under the McCain Institute auspices, to get to know one another, to share and meet with senior officials, including in London. So we know that there's this very deep relationship when it comes to intelligence and national security. We share information. For the United States, that's as important as it is for the United Kingdom. While we might be the largest economy in the world, still the most proficient, strongest military power, we gain our power and influence through our diplomacy, which means that we have to work with allies. And that's an advantage that we have that frankly makes us stronger than Canada. I'll just add this one thing. We talk about middle powers working together now, that's happened because the Canadian Prime Minister started talking about it, the EU, and of course, your previous Prime Minister. The reality is middle powers can hold their ground and they can be effective working together. But at the end of the day, the real superpower conflict, if you will, or tension is between the United States and China. And you all want democracy and freedom. You want the same things, the same system of government reflected by our shared values. And so therefore, our allies, including the United Kingdom, our NATO allies, our allies in Asia and around the world, will work with us and make us a stronger counterbalance to China.
Are you shocked to hear that polling that suggests people, actually not just in the UK, I've seen similar polling in other countries, including across Europe and in Australia, that people now almost think that there's more strategic advantage in turning to China than the US.
Well, that is shocking and also crazy, because there is no strategic advantage in turning to China in any real way. Again, you can trade with China, but in a limited fashion, meaning not with your, at a price when it comes to maintaining your technological and military edge. So if you're the United Kingdom, sure, trade with China, deal with China, but China is never going to be able to provide the United Kingdom with assurances that your system of government won't be somehow compromised if you use their technology, for example. So, it is shocking that people around the world feel that way. I will add that President Trump is also not popular in the United States, just as a footnote, if you will.
Yeah, certainly becoming more unpopular. Let's just go back in time a little bit, because we obviously mentioned the relationship between Tony Blair and George W. Bush. I mean, arguably, Tony Blair's decisions over Iraq really damaged his legacy here in this country and really damaged the Labour Party for many years to come. Was it critical at the time to build a relationship as close as the one that they built, in which it felt like Blair was fawning to Bush? And for you inside the Foreign Office at the time, I mean, you were therefore working on that same bond between Jack Straw and Colin Powell. Yeah. What was the thinking about that?
So I mean, not going into the full detail of the background of it, but firstly to flag the importance of 9/11. 9/11 was a crucial moment in binding Tony Blair and George Bush, and obviously changed the mindset of the world in terms of the nature of threats. So Tony Blair has always taken the view and retains that view today, which is to say, and there's a strong argument for it, which goes back to what I was saying before about the UK's strategic relation to the US is so vital that it's absolutely incumbent upon the UK to be standing with the US in conflicts and disputes across the world. That for him is a sort of baseline, if you like. So in 2000, remember, you had Bill Clinton left the White House, and suddenly this right-wing Republican president is elected. There was a lot of talk in the Foreign Office and number 10 Downing Street and others around how you built a relationship with this right-wing Republican, especially as a Labour Prime Minister, particularly given the very close relationship that Tony Blair had with Bill Clinton. So there was a determination to try and build that relationship. And so Tony Blair used a lot of his own personal, both capital but also charisma to build that personal relationship with him, which, as I say, was being developed in those early years of 2000 and then of 2001, and then 9/11 changed, and that really did change the sort of calculus, if you like.
And if I just bring it to today then, Evelyn, and we look at the decision-making around Iran, I mean, I think partly because of the baggage of Iraq, it was actually much easier for European leaders to make the decision, we're not going to support you on this. But it was beyond that in a way, because Donald Trump didn't do any of the things that George W. Bush did to try to make the argument for the war in the first place. Now, all that said, Donald Trump was very upset about the fact that many allies didn't help him. And I know that you've had roles which have been really kind of close to that NATO relationship. What do you think is the impact of all of this on those allied relationships, on NATO? And therefore, what is the challenge for our new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham?
Well, I think, Anushka, it's correct that President Trump, he really didn't ask, he certainly didn't consult with European, Asian, other allies before we launched the latest war with Israel, together with Israel against Iran. So one, he didn't consult in advance, and then he didn't ask for assistance. Only retroactively did he complain that our allies weren't helping. So you're right, he did not try very hard. I think that for Europe, it's actually an opportunity to shape the outcome to use some pressure, as I mentioned earlier, to try to guide the United States to the right outcome here, and maybe Israel as well. And I think it is interesting. When I worked for the U.S. European Command, we had Israel under our auspices. I traveled there a lot, and I also worked on the weapons of mass destruction portfolio as it pertains to the Middle East. So I'm familiar with these issues, and I do think that the UK Prime Minister, I think the new Prime Minister, Prime Minister Burnham, could have a good influence also on the United States in that area, because there's been some movement on Gaza, but not enough. And, ultimately, all of these confrontations, all of this war has to be negotiated and brought to an end. And we do need the United Kingdom. Tony Blair, Prime Minister Blair, was critical in the Middle East as a partner of the United States. Let's not forget that. So I didn't answer your question about NATO. I think NATO has also some influence here that it can bring to bear. I already mentioned the Secretary General and his positive relationship with President Trump. Yes, President Trump is disappointed, but I think Europe can say, we are prepared to do X, Y, and Z. And then the U.S. president can take it or leave it. But that's a way to shape what the next steps are. And
Donald Trump, and Anushka, just to come in there, I mean, Donald Trump, in a sense, needs allies. He didn't need allies to start the military action. And in the sort of Trumpian way of seeing the world.
When he says he doesn't need anyone.
Well, yeah, he didn't to have the military offensive operation, but he certainly doesn't need need allies in the next phase. And I agree with Evelyn that in a sense that's a leverage for countries like the UK and the European countries now to have influence. And that balance of power to some extent is shifting. It's shifted because of the continued conflict in Iran. This is not, as many warned, this was not a dispute that could be sort of bombed to a solution. It was always going to need some diplomatic and other mechanisms to resolve it. And that's going to involve the Europeans. So there is a difference of leverage. And plus the fact that also, as again, Evelyn reflects, the internal politics in the US are now changing. Trump's power is not as significant as it was 12 months ago. So I think there is more leverage that the UK can have.
But he's still going to be president for quite some time. And just to bring it back to the kind of points you were making earlier, I mean, Evelyn, you were saying people would be mad to think that turning to China would be a good idea. I find it amazing that we don't even raise the human rights abuses that we've seen in China when we're having these conversations, when people are answering to these polls. But even the people whose job it is, the people who I speak to a lot, to maintain good relations between the US and the UK, will say to me, 100%, Andy Burnham has to be pragmatic. The US invests more in Britain than any other country in the world. But even they say 15 years from now, we might need to be shifting in a different direction. That this presidency right now has told us that we cannot rely on the US in the way that we used to, that we need to try and find ways to build intelligence ties in different directions, because at the moment we're so reliant on the US, and the same economically. I mean, Evelyn, do you worry that we're moving into a kind of new geopolitical phase, if you like, and that the middle countries could start to shift the way that we all see the power relations between the US and China? Well, again, I just don't think that, the UK, all of our allies, Japan, et cetera, you're not going to align with China. So fundamentally, but do you understand why they don't trust the US as much as they may have done? Oh, absolutely. And I think previously. I think it's a healthy development that, Europe now is required or is being pressured and is also recognizing the need to work harder on the Article 3 commitment under the NATO treaty, which is to provide for sovereign self-defense. Yes, you can rely on collective security at the end of the day, but you must also provide for your own defense. So I think every European country is now leaning forward. And I do regret the fact that there's a real question about U.S. commitment, and certainly in the context of Russia, which is threatening every day Europe and the United States in many different ways, some of them including
kinetic, meaning with the drones flying into European airspace, and also reckless flights, especially in the Baltic area and also over Japan. So, we know that Russia is a direct threat to Europe. And the reality is that Vladimir Putin is only deterred by the United States when it comes to being deterred from a direct attack on Europe. However, as Europe continues to build up, we will find the positive outcome is that Europe can deter Vladimir Putin from taking direct military action against Europe, and certainly a weakened Russia as it is today. So there are some positives that are coming out of this, but yes, it is regrettable that there's a real question about U.S. commitment right now.
So look, okay, Andy Burnham may want to persuade Donald Trump that what we need to do is focus on the Strait of Hormuz, and it sounds like he did try to do that in that first phone call. But if our lawyers here say what Donald Trump is doing now is breaching international humanitarian law, should Andy Burnham say to America, no, you can't use our bases? And will he do that?
Yes, ultimately. If that's the view that he was to come to, that it would breach international law, then obviously the UK couldn't take part, and that's been a sort of long tradition of UK prime ministers going back. I mean, it would be completely improper to do otherwise. Now, hopefully, it wouldn't get to that point. And Evelyn makes the point that the importance of UK's leverage is to use that upstream and to have the discussion and to ultimately to try and persuade the president and the US about looking at effective measures rather than ones which are driven by whatever motivations, whether it's revenge or whatever else, but is ultimately illegal and would be completely immoral. So absolutely, you should have that ability to say no.
And on oil and gas, which is, I think, Donald Trump's absolute obsession. Have you ever, I watch hours and hours of the president speaking. The amount he talks about Scottish windmills, as he puts it, the amount he talks about drilling oil and gas. Already, we've had a signal from the new Prime Minister, not verbally from him, but from those around him, that he's going to perhaps greenlight 2 oil and gas projects, at least one of which the former Energy Secretary, who I'm going to ask about next, was resisting, Rosebank and Jackdaw, to the delight of President Trump. Does that disappoint you, Ed?
No, I think it's perfectly pragmatic. So let's separate the two issues out here. There is a pragmatic reason why the UK should approve that further work in the North Sea oil fields because of the current energy crisis that's affected the world, and particularly having this big impact.
It would have absolutely zero impact on prices.
No, true, but it would.
The supply is tiny.
Sure, but it would have.
And what climate experts say is it would signal to developing countries, we're going to squeeze out every last drop. So should you.
Well, I think we've got to be. I'm not for a minute suggesting. I don't think Andy Burnham is suggesting for a minute that the strategic policy should be absolutely to how we move to clean energy, sustainable, secure sources of power. We should absolutely be doing that. But for me, we need a mix, and we need a mix in this transition period. And given the crisis that we've been inflicted upon that has this big impact on the UK, we should absolutely be looking at all options. But that doesn't mean that we drop the policy. It seems to me a perfectly pragmatic thing. I certainly don't think, firstly, this is not a big drill, baby, drill moment in the way that Trump would reflect it. And it's not being done because Trump wants it. It's a UK policy decision. I hope they do make that decision because I think it's appropriate in the particular needs that the UK has.
And Evelyn, I don't know how much you know specifically about Ed Miliband, but he's become our foreign secretary. He was our energy secretary. He's very much seen as on the left of the party, former leader of the Labour Party. He very much was resisting at least one of these 2 projects in the North Sea. Already there's an indication from the White House that they're nervous about him. How much is the relationship predicated on the relationship between Secretary of State and Foreign Secretary? Do you think that having someone in that position who Donald Trump probably doesn't align with at all is a problem?
Anushka, I don't think it's a problem. I think the real relationship that President Trump will focus on is the relationship with Prime Minister Burnham. So, the fact that Foreign Minister Miliband has a different perspective, that might impact his relationship with Secretary Rubio. But Secretary Rubio's got a lot of other things on his plate. I think, the other thing with the North Sea, oil exploration, the drilling, is I know you mentioned, Anushka, it's not going to change the price of oil, but it's also important signaling. And this is where I think the signaling to Russia is really important. Here, the UK is saying, we're going to assert our sovereign rights, and we're also strengthening our deterrence, in a sense. This is economic deterrence, if you will, against Russia. So I think in that sense, it's only a short-term measure. And, as Ed said, the long-term strategic game is still, diversifying to renewables. But in the short run, I actually think this is a positive, and it's more of a political move probably than an economic one.
And just on a personal level, how do you think that, and I'll ask this to both of you, but you first, Evelyn, how do you think Andy Burnham can get Donald Trump to like him without giving him everything he wants?
Well, I think give him a present that he'll like. So, if you look at the former late Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Abe, he was really early on with the gold golf clubs. And, President Trump associates the UK with golf. So you can't do the golf club thing maybe exactly the same, but giving him the right gift, I think we know President Trump likes to be treated a certain way. And that is not, I think that the Prime Minister can be strong, but also, flattering, if you will, or gracious.
It sounds like you don't think that Mark Rutte has got the balance wrong. I mean, many would say he's tipped too far, that there was no need to call him daddy, for instance.
Honestly, I think that because of the outcome, I don't, I mean, the optics are weird and the wording was weird, but at the end of the day, the danger to NATO has been minimized. So I think every leader has to make up their mind.
Give him every nickname he wants if it gets
run the relationship.
Yeah. And just finally, Ed, on that, we're in a different world already from when Keir Starmer got his letter out from the King to Donald Trump. I mean, a meeting that so many people spent hours and hours and hours preparing for, right down to where Keir Starmer was going to tap him on the shoulder and when. I mean, if Andy Burnham does that now, it's going to go down a lot more negatively than it did then. Surely.
I can't see Andy doing that. Andy will, maybe he should give him an Everton scarf. Actually, I know. James Pennell, his new chief of staff, I think plays golf. So maybe he should send James to go play golf with President Trump
with golf clubs.
Yeah, but no, I don't think that'll be Andy's style. Andy will bring his own personality to it. Of course, he'll want to, for all the reasons we've talked about in this podcast, he'll want to sort of build a rapport, build a relationship, because it's an important part of strengthening that broader relationship between the US and UK. But yeah, I think the fawning isn't gonna wash anymore.
Ed, Evelyn, really, really interesting conversation. Thank you so much both for being here. That is all from TrumpWorld this week. I am away for a few weeks from now, but Matt Fry will be here with you from next week.